Countess Nara van Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the history of Magic the Gathering, where I go set by set, product release by product release, going over some basic information of storyline, mechanics, and some various cards you might want to know about everything that Wizards of the Coast has released over the years. So today for you, I have the second set in the Alara block, Conflux. So Conflux was released on February 6, 2009, with 145 cards to it. It had the keywords of Cycling, Devour, Domain, Exalted, and Unearth. It was the first of the small sets in the new, slightly changed format that Magic was going for, that they basically were evening out some of the sets a little bit, and it was the first one of these to have mythic rares included in them. So definitely first mythic rares in a small set. Now, it continued some of the multicolored type themes that were within the Shards of Alara set, but it also expanded on them as we began to see 5-color multicolor things come into existence, representing the Alara as a whole. Now, beyond the returning of multicolor from Shards, we did have all the normal mechanics that were in here return in this set. We also saw the reemergence of Niko Bolas. Niko Bolas had been seen in card form back in the Legends set as a just legendary dragon. Now we're seeing him as what the storylines have described him as, becoming a Planeswalker dragon. And he's finally re-emerging. Now the expansion symbol itself is supposed to represent the conversion of the 5 shards of Alara into one plane, Alara. Now, this set itself was accompanied by a novel, Agents of Artifice, that told some of the stories of the Alara block of what was going on. On September 29th, 2008, on Magic the Gathering Salvation, the entire Conflux set was leaked. This kind of symbolizes the controlled leaks that would come in the future after now. What we have nowadays, they call it the spoiler season, where Magic leaks out things at a slow, trickled rate to show off things, rather than everything getting spoiled or leaked, or problems like this that occurred a little earlier than they wanted back in the past. Now, the basic storyline of the set has that a mysterious and sinister force, we know as Niko Bolas, has been conspiring to have the Shards of Alara once again merge back into one. But this process, this energy, is not without a price, and chaos reigns across the various shards. The worlds begin to overlap. War, destruction, death, all reign supreme across all of these shards. The Conflux has begun. Now, it was sold in 16-card booster packs, 5 intro decks, and a fat pack. Now, Conflux was also the first set to be sold in special 6-card booster packs. These included a trip/trips card or a token, 1 basic land, 3 commons, 1 uncommon, and a space available for either another uncommon, a rare, or a mythic rare. You wouldn't know which of those 3 you'd get in that last space. Sometimes that last space might even have a common. These were exclusively available at large mass market stores, things like Targets and Walmarts. Now, the pre-release card was the Demon Dragon Malfegor, and it was held on January 31st, and going through that entire weekend of 2009. The release card that was put at the launch parties as celebration for the launch of the set was Obelisk of Alara, put out there because it represented the 5 colors, an artifact that had an activated ability for each of the colors of mana. Now, of course, I do want to mention, just like with Shards of Alara, the entire Alara block had a all-foil booster pack released after it was done, representing cards from all 3 sets that came out. Now, of course, the 16th card was our tips/trips/token card. In this case, there was 4 tips/tricks that existed that would give you a little bit of information, and then 2 specific tokens for this set. The backs of all these were a combination of 13 different advertisements. Now, these weren't the only tokens that were put out during this time, though, because there were 3 reprint tokens from Shards of Alara that also came out in this set and accompanied it. So you could get either the 2 new tokens or one of these 3 other tokens because, well, there are things in this set which create these tokens also, so why make a complete new one when you can just, re-include the ones that you need? Now, all the keywords and mechanics that we'd seen in Shards of Alara were back. The colored artifacts from Esper, Exalted in Bant, Devour and Jund, Unearthed and Grix, and of course 5 power plus creatures in Naya. In much the same way, there were a lot of the same themes that were of course in Shards of Alara, except now we're introducing color hate, because the shards are getting to know each other in ways that they don't want. Of course you find that there are things that target and have, well, hatred for other colors. Now in Conflux, domain became an ability word. Previously, domain had just been, you count the number of basic lands amongst all the basic land types you have, that's the number you have for something. Now domain was specifically an ability word. When a domain ability would go off, it would be based upon the number of basic land types you had. Pretty simple, something that hadn't had a keyword, now it does. This was the set that also introduced us to basic land cycling. It functions much the same way that normal cycling would, but rather than draw a card when you would cycle this card, you would search your library for a basic land, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So, similar, except a little different. This set also saw the introduction to the first and only creature to ever have protection from everything, Progenesis. Now, there were 8 cycles in this set. There was a cycle of common basic land cycling cards. Common instants or sorceries that of course had basic land cycling. The common allied colored spells. These were common spells that were the combination of 2 allied colors in its casting cost. There were a cycle of creatures with shard-colored activated abilities. This meant that the creature itself would have to have the 2 other colors of the shard in its activated ability that it would have. So if we have the white creature from Bant, it would have blue-green to activate it and get its activated ability. The enemy color hosers were uncommon cards that once you played them, they would basically do bad things to the 2 enemy colors of the color of spell it was for fairly low cost. The Outlanders were 2/2 allied colored scout, which had protection from the enemy color, which is both of their colors' enemy color. So you'd look at what the 2 allied colors combined in the cost of this Outlander. Whatever enemy color they both shared, that's what it had protection against. They had the rare shard-colored creatures. These, of course, were creatures that had the 3 mana in its mana cost of the shard. The uncommon allied-colored spells. These, of course, were uncommon spells that had, well, combination of 2 allied colors in its casting cost. And of course there was the uncommon shard-colored spells. These were, once again, uncommon, as obvious, but it contained mana cost at least 1 of each of the 3 manas of its shard. Now there were 3 mini-cycles also in this one, 2 that were specifically from Esper, and 1 that just didn't complete it. The ones from Esper were an Esper artifact enhanced creatures. And of course they were artifact creatures in and of themselves because they're from Esper, but each of these creatures within the cycle had bonuses if you controlled other artifact creatures. The Esper Scepters were colored versions of old artifacts from back in the day. Basically, they took an older artifact and made a colored version of it and put it in the Sept as one of the Scepters. The uncommon 5-colored creatures were in fact not 5 mana cost in their mana cost. What they were 2 2s that cost you 2 colorless and 1 mana of a color. But they had an ability where you could activate it, and activation involved paying 1 of each color mana to give it a big bonus. So I'd put out this creature, if I could pay the rainbow of colors, gets a big bonus. Now there were 4 reprints in the set, including Unsummon, back all the way from Alpha and the rest of the Limited, 7 functional reprints, including Canyon Minotaur for Hill Giant back and on the Limited sets, and a number of others that was actually a functional reprint of. It is important to note here, though, there were 4 special functional reprints, because it was only almost a cycle of functional reprints. Say for the Vidalcan Outlander, which is an artifact creature, because it's from Esper, all the other Outlanders were functional reprints of allied colored enemy protection creatures from Invasion. So the only difference to make this a cycle of functional reprints is the one is artifact creature instead of just being creature. That's it. Otherwise, it would be a full playset of all 5 of them. Instead, it's just 4 functional reprints here. Partial cycle. Now, the intro packs were, of course, a white, blue, green called Bant on the March, a white, blue, black called Esper Air Assault, a blue-black-red called Grixis, Shambling Army, a black-red-green called Jund, Appetite for War, and a red-green-white called Naya Domain. Let's talk about some cards from this set. There's the Night of Reliquary, which gets +1/+1 for each land card in your graveyard, and had a special ability we could tap it to sacrifice a plains or a forest to search your library for a land card and put it into play. So it had an ability that you could cycle out your lands. In a way, if you have enough lands, you could use this to cut out lands from your deck, less worry about drawing them, and in turn make it bigger because then you're putting lands into your graveyard. If you have a little bit of land graveyard resurrection with something like a groundskeeper, well, you can continually get lands out on both sides and just keep getting lands from your deck, one each turn. The Maelstrom Angel was a 5/5 flying angel that cost you 1 of every color mana. Whenever it would deal combat damage to a player, you may play a non-land card from your hand without paying its mana cost. I deal damage to an opponent, I get a card for free from my hand. It was a way to trick out and play some very powerful things because it was non-land. There was also Niko Bolas, Planeswalker. He started with 5 tokens on him. For a tick up of 3, you destroyed target non-creature permanent. For a tick down of 2, you gain control of target creature. And for a tick down of 9, you deal 7 damage to target player. That player discards 7 cards and sacrifices 7 permanents. Just, Niko Bolas is mean and terrible and tears people apart. Noble Hierarch is a 0/1 Exalted for 1 green mana that could tap for a green, white, or blue. So, pretty decent one here. Path to Exile is a wonderful one. Costs you 1 white mana. You exile target creature. Its controller searches its library for a basic land card and puts it into play tapped. So effectively, I just exile something I don't want. Its controller gets a basic land card, but who cares? I got rid of something. And we have, of course, Progenesis. It is a 10/10 protection from anything that costs you 10 mana cost. 2 of every color mana. If it would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, you reveal Progenesis, and instead of putting it into the graveyard, shuffle it into its owner's library. Pretty simple. It is protection from everything, hard to get rid of. Why would it be there? You'd have to sacrifice it, maybe. That's the only way. Something causes you to sacrifice anything. There goes Progenesis. But other than that, it's just there. It's just there and just destroys. Progenesis. Airy Mystics are a 3/3 flyer that for 1 colorless, a green and a blue, creatures you control gain Shroud until end of turn. Now, it's no hexproof, but if you want to make sure that all your creatures are protected from anything until end of turn that would target them, bam! Shroud. Ancient Ziggurat. It taps for 1 mana of any color, but the mana that this land produced can be only used to cast creature spells. So you are restricted on the kind of things that you play with Ancient Ziggurat. But if you are a very, very creature-heavy deck, might be worth it. You can tap for any color mana. There is Apocalypse Hydra. It is a 0/0 creature, but it costs you X to play. It comes into play with X +1/+1 counters on it. If that X happens to be 5 or more, though, it comes into play with twice what that X is, basically an extra X. So if I would play it and I'd only have 4 for my X, it's a 4/4. But as soon as I hit that 5 for my X, it's a 10/10 instead of a 5/5. Doubles it. For 1 colorless and a red, I can remove a +1/+1 counter from Apocalypse Hydra to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So there's another advantage to making it really big and mean. I could toss off those counters to, well, damage and kill things. Armillary Spear is really good for any deck for a little bit of ramp. For 2 colorless mana tapping and sacrificing it, I can search my library for up to 2 basic lands, reveal them, and put them into my hand. Shuffle my library afterwards. This works in any color deck as a way of getting just 2 extra lands in my hand that I can use to play out. Granted, still playing 1 every turn, but that's keeping that up of that rate of 1 land every turn, which sometimes you don't draw a land. This is a way of doing it. There's Blood Tyrant, a 5/5 flying trample. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player loses 1 life. For each 1 life lost this way, put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Tyrant. That means the more players you are playing against, the bigger Blood Tyrant gets, the faster the Blood Tyrant gets bigger. If a player would lose the game, put 5 +1/+1 counters on Blood Tyrant, meaning that as The more enemies that you eliminate from the game, especially if it's a big multiplayer game, the bigger Blood Tyrant gets. Bloodhall Ooze, a 1/1 for 1 red mana. Now at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a black permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Bloodhall Ooze. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a green permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Bloodhall Ooze. Effectively, if you're playing Jund colors, black, red, green, then yeah, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger by 2 +1/+1 counters a turn. It's pretty rapid. Charnel Horde Worm is a 6/6 trample that whenever it deals damage to an opponent, not combat damage, damage, so you have an alternate way of giving this thing the ability to do an opponent's damage, you may turn a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Meaning somehow I damage my opponent, I get things that are dead back from my graveyard to my hand to replay again and to once again be back into the fray. Child of Alara, a 6/6 trample. It is also a 5 mana creature with 1 mana of each color and its cost. If Child of Alara would put into the graveyard from play, destroy all non-land permanents, they can't be regenerated. Basically, when it dies, so does everything else except for lands. Conflux, it will cost you 8 mana. 3 colorless, 1 of every color mana. Search your library for a white card, a blue card, a black card, a red card, and a green card. You will reveal the 5 cards you searched for. Put them into your hand, shuffle your library. For 8 mana, you get 5 cards. And because, they just have to be of that color, you can get multicolor cards. There's so many possibilities for the 5 cards you could pull out from your deck and put into your hand. Very powerful. Elder Mastery, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3 and has flying. When enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, that opponent discards 2 cards. I could put Elder Mastery on something that taps to deal damage, or something like that Apocalypse Hydra, where I could take off counters to deal damage. Deal 1 damage to opponent, they discard 2 cards. I could keep an opponent from ever having cards in hand. As soon as they draw it, untap, upkeep, draw. As soon as their main phase begins, bam, they take damage, they discard it. Guess what? You didn't get to play that land or that enchantment or sorcery or creature because I'm just messing with you. And I can now. With Elder Mastery. Esperzoza. It's a 4/3 flying. At the beginning of your upkeep, return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. It seems so simple and something that's like, oh, that's not helpful. Why would I return it? There are so many comes into play effects also attached to artifacts that it's great. You can have artifacts that you remove counters from that come into play with a number of counters. Oh, guess what? I used up all those counters. It comes back. I replay it. Something that comes into play and I get a token or I get a counter on something. There are so many reasons behind it that having this is an excellent and powerful thing. Aethersworn Adjudicator. It is a 4/4 flyer. For a colorless, a black, and a white, you tap it to destroy target creature or enchantment. Nukes things out of the sky. Not artifacts, it's an artifact creature, but it gets rid of creatures and enchantments. And for 2 colors and a blue, you untap it. 6 mana, and it's still there to either attack or be ready to tap again, and you destroy something. It's a little expensive, but it has usage, because that's creatures and enchantments you can control with it. Exotic Orchard. You can tap this land for any color mana that a land an opponent controls could produce. So if my opponent can produce white, green, and red mana, guess what? My Exotic Orchard taps for white, green, and red mana. Whatever my opponents can produce, that's what I can produce with Exotic Orchard. Extractor Demon, a 5/5 flying with Unearth for 2 colors, 1 black. That's not the important part of it. Whenever another creature leaves play, you may have Extractor Demon have target player put the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. Whenever a creature leaves play, not a creature you control, creature in a sacrificial deck, in a grave pack deck, where you're getting rid of tokens left and right, and you lose creatures, my opponents lose creatures, multiple opponents lose creatures, I could just mill someone to unexistence very rapidly, very quickly. Extractor Demon. That's why it's useful. Font of Mythos. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws 2 cards. This is 2 additional cards, may I note you. So this is like Howling Mine plus some. So it's double the Howling Mine. So if you had Howling Mine, oh, I'm only drawing 1 extra card for 2 cards. Now I'm drawing 3 cards a turn, thanks to Font of Mythos. But everybody is, too. You'll see why there's particularly good reason why you have everybody do it in a minute. We'll talk about a special type of deck I've played against. Goblin Raze Runners. For a colorless and a red, you may sacrifice a land to put a +1/+1 counter on Goblin Raze Runners. So it's a little bit more land sacrifice. Now here's the reason why you might want to sacrifice, a whole bunch of reasons to Goblin Raze Runners. At the end of your turn, you may have Goblin Raze Runners deal damage equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it to target player. So the more lands you sacrifice, the more damage at the end of your turn you do to every opponent. You do to a opponent of your choice. You can slowly dip and damage them, eat them away with the Raze Runners. Pretty interesting little combos you can do with this one. Guafa Hazard Privateer. For a white and a blue, put a bribery counter on target creature you don't control. That's the important note about this. You're bribing something you don't control. That creature's controller draws a card. So, yeah, I bribe that creature, but you get a card in return for it. Now, why would I want to bribe creatures then? I'm giving my opponents cards. Well, creatures with bribery counters on them can attack or block. Oh, you have this ultra-powerful creature. I'm going to have to worry about it. Oh, it's bribed. It's bribed and it just sits there. It can't attack. It can't block. It's no longer defensive or offensive. You get a card. The only way you could possibly remove that bribery counter because it's a special card counter is to return that to your hand, put it into the graveyard, something like that, and then return it to play, which might not be easy. And that's if you can do that. Granted, there's other ways of removing counters, but that's the easy way. That's the easy way to remove counters. Inkwell Leviathan. It's a 7/11, Island Walk, Trample Shroud. Fairly simple, fairly deadly, fairly nice. It's a staple of big, stompy blue things, even though it's a artifact creature, big, stompy blue things. It is one of the better ones of those big, stompy blue, because there isn't like a big payment cost for this Leviathan. It kind of marked a change, the way that they looked at blue, big, stompy creatures, from things like the Polar Kraken back in the day, or the Leviathan, where it had very high maintenance costs. This is big, this is mean, doesn't have that maintenance cost. Now here's what goes with Font of Mythos. Kedrick Parasite. If an opponent would draw a card and you control a red permanent, you may have the Parasite deal 1 damage to that opponent. So basically, I need this black creature, any red permanent, and any time an opponent draws a card, I can deal them 1 damage. Font of Mythos. My opponents are taking 3 damage a turn. Oh wait, I've got a couple Fonts of Mythos out. I'm having you draw like 6 cards a turn. Oh, wow. 6 damage. Ooh, ouch. Can you play them all? No? Ooh, sorry for you. Do I need to play all my cards? Nah, I'm fine with discarding. Doesn't do anything bad to me. I'm just messing up other people by having them draw massive piles and piles of cards. I played a deck that used this as an actual mechanic. It was a very interesting deck. Did a pretty decent job, too, even in multiplayer. Magister Sphinx, a 5/5 flyer that when it comes into play, target player's life total becomes 10. This is actually do a lot of damage to a life gain deck that might have been gaining a lot of life throughout a game. Oh, guess what? Now your life is 10. Makes it a little bit more manageable for me. Mark of Asylum. Prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to creatures you control. I effectively shut down things like burns, direct damage of any kind, any of that sort of stuff that would not be combat-related damage. Doesn't hurt my creatures. There are some really great combos with that. I played this one here with a deck that could damage my own creatures. Guess what? Mark of Asylum prevents that. I still keep my creatures and everything else burns. Martial Coup. Put X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. If X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. Meaning if I, let's say, would pay 10, get 10 little soldier tokens with this X spell, well, everything else gets destroyed. I'm the only one that has an army with all my soldier tokens. Master Transmuter. For 1 blue, tap it. Return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. You may put an artifact card from your hand into play. Think about this. For 1 blue, I could return, let's say, a 1 mana cost artifact, something like a Soul Ring, to my hand. And then put out something, let's say, Darksteel Colossus, which is, it was like 11 mana? Oh, boom, out. oh, I had this Soul Ring out, and I used that to play Master Transmuter on my second turn. So this is my third turn, and I have a indestructible trample. I think it's 11/11. Well, yeah. That's how Master Transmuter is very powerful. Artifact mana ramp, blue, and that. And you could throw out huge artifacts very early on, or just make it that you can combo out a couple of really big cost things very quickly, very rapidly. Megalonth, a 6/6 Vigilance Trample. Whenever Megalonth blocks a creature, it deals damage to that creature's controller equal to its power. So effectively, I could attack with it because it's got Vigilance, and then afterwards I will use it to block and defend, and then Megalonth will also deal its damage to that creature's controller, as if it had attacked, only it's defensively. So it's a pretty mean little creature here that, well, I shouldn't call it little, should I? Mirror Sigil Sergeant. It is a 4/4 trample. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a blue permanent, you may put a token that is a copy of Mirror Signal Sergeant into play. Think about that. I have a Mirror Signal Sergeant. I get a token that's a copy of it. That token also has the ability that if beginning of my upkeep, I control a permanent, blue permanent, I get a copy of it. So each turn I start with 1, then I have 2, then I have 4, then 8, then 16, and etc., as I continually double my Mirror Sigil Sergeants. As long as I have a blue permanent. Paloth. A 5/5, whenever a creature with a power of 5 or greater is put into your battlefield, comes into play under your control, you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So, in a big creature deck, as I play big creatures, I get big creatures back that may have died. Rakamar, a 2/2 haste that for 1 red mana, tap, put a 3/1 elemental creature token into play with haste. Pretty good for token creation since they are 3/1s. Reliquary Tower. You have no maximum hand size. It taps for a colorless. It's a land that gives you no maximum hand size. It's very good. Rupture Spire. It comes into play tapped. And when it comes into play, you have to pay 1 colorless mana or sacrifice Rupture Spire. But then, if you did this, it taps for any color mana. Pretty decent, actually. Rupture Spire is a great way of getting some any color mana ramp. Scepter of Insights. It's an artifact that for 3 colorless and a blue, tapping it, you can draw a card. It's like Yavimay Atone, only blue. It's one of those scepters. Sigil of the Empty Throne. If you would play an enchantment spell, put a 4/4 white flying angel token into play. So if I'm playing an enchantment deck, I have at least one of these sigils out. I get angels each time I play another enchantment. Lots and lots of angels. Enchantment decks this is great for. Skyward Eye Prophets. It's a 3/3 vigilance and tap. Reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it into play. If it's anything else, put it into your hand. So it's a good way, it's an interesting way of drawing a card, possibly putting an extra land from your library into the battlefield. Possible little mana ramp, a little at least card drawing. Pretty interesting that way. Sludge Strider. If another artifact would come into play under your control, or another artifact leaves play from your control, you may pay 1 colorless mana. So either artifact enters, artifact leave, pay that 1 colorless mana. If you do pay that mana, target player loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So in something like an artifact token deck, where you're creating artifact tokens, and maybe even sacrificing artifact tokens, you can keep paying mana to Sludge Strider and continually having opponents lose a life, you gain a life. You just suck it out, slowly but surely. The more artifacts you get, the more life you drain. The more artifacts you lose, the more life you drain. Sphinx Summoner, a 3/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact creature card, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. Is this the greatest of all things? No. But there are some pretty powerful artifact creature cards that it could search for and get into your hand. And then if you're something like Master Transmuter, you could actually return the summoner to your hand to replay it and then put the creature that you just got out. Master Transmuter and the Sphinx Summoner allows you to pay 6 mana to summon anything from anywhere in your deck into play, if it's an artifact creature. Artifact creature deck, this is very good. Telemin Performance. Target opponent reveals the top cards of his or her library until they reveal a creature card. That player puts all non-creature cards revealed this way into their graveyard. You put this creature revealed into play under your control. So not only do you maybe mill your opponent a bunch of cards, you steal something from them. Random what it is, but hey, I just messed with them. It's a fun mess with. Unstable Frontier. Tap for 1 colorless mana, or tap. Target land you control becomes the basic land type of your choice until end of turn. Now this might not seem like much, but it would be a way that you could produce any color mana or produce a land that you might need all of a sudden under your control right then and there. So Unstable Frontier does have its uses. Vagrant Plowbeast. It's a 6/6 for 1 colorless mana. Regenerate target creature with a power of 5 or greater. Remember, it has a 6/6, so it has a power of 5 or greater. So you could regenerate the Plowbeast on its own just by paying that colorless. Or if you really wanted to, you could regenerate something else if you have a bunch of big 5/5s or bigger, because that's what, of course, Naya does. It's their big 5+ creature size. And now you could regenerate them. Wall of Reverence, a 1/6 flying defender. Because of course it's a defender. It's a wall. At the end of your turn, you may gain life equal to the power of target creature you control. So if you have some kind of big, gigantic creature, guess what? I have Wall of Reverence out. At the end of my turn, that's how much life I gain. It makes having big creatures really good. And it makes life gain in a big creature deck very nice. Oh, Wall of Reverence. You're wonderful. But that's it for today. So I introduced you to Conflux. Now, truth told, does a lot of the same things as the Alara, the Shards of Alara set did. It's an expansion on that. It's an extension on that. An evolution to a degree. Certain things have changed. Certain things have been added. It fits with the storyline, but a lot of the same mechanics and themes have stayed the same. And there are still some great cards which have been introduced here that I've used plenty of them. I like Mirror Sigil Sergeant. I love Progenesis. Never really get to play Progenesis, but love the dragon. These things are very powerful, very great, good cards that you can check out. So Conflux has some great things to look into. It expanded upon what the Alara block was, and it helped bridge the gap between everything they wanted to do within it when we talk about Alara Reborn. It really is something that was needed to bridge these two together. But I hope you're having a great day. If you ever had a Alara block deck, or you played with some of these cards before, let me know in the comments below. Love hearing about your decks or some of the games that you've had in the past. Regardless though, until the next time, I bid you farewell.